Aqualung, my friend, don't just start away uneasy. You poor old sod, you see it's only